October 12, 1932. Lucky Luciano pressed the cold steel barrel against Stephanie St. Clair's temple. The most powerful man in organized crime had cornered the Queen of Harlem in a warehouse on the Lower East Side. Every mobster in the room expected the same ending: one trigger pull, one less problem. But Stephanie St. Clair looked directly into Lucky's eyes and said 5 words that would change the balance of power in New York forever. "You need me more than I need you." Lucky's finger froze on the trigger, because in that moment the boss of bosses realized something terrifying. The French woman from Guadeloupe was right. This is the untold story of the night America's most feared gangster backed down from a 45-year-old immigrant who carried nothing but her intelligence as a weapon. Chapter 1. The Numbers Queen of Harlem. By 1932, Stephanie St. Clair controlled the most profitable numbers racket in New York City, collecting over 20,000 daily from betting slips scattered across Harlem's tenements, barbershops, and street corners. The numbers game was simple. Players bet on 3-digit combinations drawn from financial data published in newspapers. A nickel bet could win $30. For people making $15 a week, those nickels represented hope. Stephanie had arrived from Guadeloupe in 1911 with $10 and a thick French accent. She worked as a seamstress, a maid, a street vendor, saving every penny until she could afford to become a numbers banker. She offered better odds than competitors, paid winners immediately, and never cheated players. But Stephanie was more than a gambling operator. She was Harlem's protector. When corrupt cops tried to shake down black businesses, she paid their legal fees. When landlords threatened evictions, she covered rent. The community didn't just play her numbers. They trusted her with their lives. By 1930, Stephanie controlled 40 numbers banks across Manhattan. Her enforcer, Bumpy Johnson, protected operations from rival gangs and police raids. She had built the most sophisticated gambling empire in American history, and every penny of profit stayed in Harlem. This drove the Italian families insane. They controlled gambling everywhere else in New York, but Harlem remained independent, black-owned, woman-controlled. But what the Italians didn't know, what they couldn't understand, was that Stephanie St. Clair possessed something more dangerous than money or muscle. She had information that could destroy the entire New York underworld. Chapter 2. The Schultz Problem. Dutch Schultz made the first move. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the German Jewish mobster needed new revenue streams. In January 1932, he sent 20 armed men to Stephanie's counting house on Lenox Avenue, announcing that Dutch now controlled Harlem's numbers racket. Stephanie's response was strategic. She placed a full-page advertisement in the Amsterdam News. "Attention Harlem players. Dutch Schultz is attempting to take over your numbers game. Madame Queen guarantees every bet will be honored, every winner paid within 24 hours. Don't let outsiders steal what belongs to you." The advertisement included a list of 47 NYPD officers who accepted bribes from Dutch, complete with badge numbers and payment amounts. Within 48 hours, Internal Affairs launched investigations. 16 officers were suspended, 7 were arrested, 3 committed suicide. Dutch's police protection evaporated overnight. But Dutch approached Lucky Luciano with a proposition. The Luciano family would help crush Stephanie's organization in exchange for splitting Harlem's profits. Lucky agreed, not because he needed the money, but because he couldn't allow a black woman to operate independently in Manhattan and embarrass the Italian Mafia. The decision would prove to be Lucky's biggest mistake. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. Lucky Luciano had reorganized American organized crime into the modern structure still used today. 5 families controlling specific territories, with disputes settled through a commission rather than war. Lucky was called the boss of bosses because he had unified them. Every major decision in New York's underworld required his approval. Stephanie St. Clair represented the biggest challenge Lucky had ever faced. She wasn't just another competitor. She was proof that the Italian monopoly on organized crime could be broken. If a Caribbean immigrant with a French accent could build a multi-million-dollar operation without mafia permission, what did that say about Italian superiority? Lucky's reputation, his authority, his entire power structure depended on controlling the narrative. Either Stephanie St. Clair would submit to Italian dominance, or she would be eliminated. What Lucky didn't anticipate was that Stephanie had been preparing for this confrontation since the day she stepped off the boat from Guadeloupe, and her preparation involved more than guns and bodyguards. Chapter 4. The Intelligence War. For 20 years, Stephanie had been collecting secrets. Every corrupt cop who demanded bribes, every politician who accepted envelopes, every judge who fixed cases, every detail was documented and stored in safe deposit boxes across Manhattan. Most importantly, she knew Lucky's biggest secret. Since 1930, Lucky had been running a prostitution ring that generated over $10 million annually. High-class call girls serving wealthy businessmen, corrupt politicians, and federal law enforcement officials. Lucky used this network for blackmail. Every client was photographed, every transaction documented. This wasn't just a business, it was his insurance policy. Stephanie had spent 2 years infiltrating Lucky's operation. She placed trusted associates as madams in 3 of his most exclusive brothels. She bribed photographers for copies of compromising pictures. She paid accountants to reveal financial records. By October 1932, Stephanie possessed enough evidence to destroy Lucky's prostitution empire, expose his political corruption network, and send the boss of bosses to prison for 50 years. Lucky had no idea how much Stephanie knew, but he was about to find out. Chapter 5. The Setup. Lucky's message was simple. Stephanie would cease operations, turn over her territories to Dutch Schultz, and leave New York permanently. In exchange, Lucky would allow her to live. Stephanie agreed to meet on neutral ground with no more than 5 representatives from each side. Warehouse 47 on the Lower East Side belonged to Giuseppe Masseria's old organization. Empty, isolated, symbolically appropriate, where old power structures came to die. October 12, 1932. 11:30 p.m. Lucky arrived with Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Albert Anastasia, and Bugsy Siegel. Stephanie came with Bumpy Johnson, Casper Holstein, Wilfred Brunder, and Raymond Martinez. The warehouse was lit by a single overhead bulb. Lucky sat at a wooden table wearing an expensive charcoal suit and fedora. Stephanie sat across from him in a simple black dress carrying only a black leather purse. But appearances, as Lucky was about to learn, could be devastatingly deceiving. Chapter 6. The Negotiation. Lucky began the conversation in his typical style, calm, reasonable, almost fatherly. He had perfected this approach over years of negotiations with union leaders, politicians, and business rivals. Start friendly, establish common ground, make reasonable offers, and if necessary, gradually escalate to threats. Mrs. St. Clair, you've built something impressive in Harlem. I respect that. But times are changing. The numbers business is getting more complicated, more dangerous. You need protection that only we can provide. Stephanie listened without interruption, her expression neutral. Lucky continued, Dutch Schultz is crazy, unpredictable. If he takes over your operation, he'll destroy everything you've built. Your people will suffer. But if you work with us, we'll honor your existing arrangements. Your customers keep their odds. Your runners keep their jobs. You keep a fair percentage of the profits. How fair? Stephanie asked, speaking for the first time. 20%, Lucky replied. That's not fair, Stephanie said. That's conquest with a smile. Lucky's expression hardened slightly. The alternative is Dutch takes everything and you get nothing, or worse. The alternative, Stephanie said, is I continue operating independently and you explain to the other families why you couldn't control one woman with a French accent. The room went silent. Lucky's men shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke to the boss of bosses like that. Not union leaders, not politicians, certainly not someone outside the organization. Lucky leaned forward. You're making a mistake, lady, a big mistake. The mistake, Stephanie replied, was thinking I would be intimidated by threats. I've been threatened by better men than you, Lucky Luciano, and all of them learned the same lesson you're about to learn. Lucky's eyes went cold. This was not going according to plan. The reasonable approach had failed. Time for escalation. He nodded to Albert Anastasia. Anastasia stood up, walked around the table, and positioned himself behind Stephanie's chair. His hand moved to his jacket, where everyone knew he carried a .38 caliber revolver. Last chance, Lucky said. Take the deal or take the consequences. Stephanie didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge Anastasia's presence. She kept her eyes locked on Lucky's face. You want to know what your consequences are? She asked. Before Lucky could answer, Stephanie opened her purse and removed a manila envelope. She placed it on the table between them. Inside this envelope are photographs of 17 federal judges, 12 prosecutors, 8 police captains, and 4 members of Congress. All of them are clients of your prostitution operation. All of them are compromised. All of them are under your control. Lucky's face went white. Also in this envelope are financial records showing exactly how much money each of these officials has accepted from your organization. Bank deposits, cash payments, gifts, favors. Everything documented, everything verified. Lucky's hand moved toward the envelope, but Stephanie pulled it back. I have copies in 6 different locations, she said. If anything happens to me, if I disappear, if I have an accident, if I die of natural causes, all of these documents go to the FBI, the Treasury Department, the New York District Attorney's Office, and every newspaper in the city. The warehouse was dead silent. Even the ambient city noise seemed to fade away. Stephanie continued, but that's not the most interesting part. The most interesting part is what I learned about your partnership with Dutch Schultz. Lucky's jaw tightened. Dutch has been skimming money from the Bronx operations for 2 years. Not just a little money. A lot of money. Enough money to buy his own army. Enough to challenge your authority. Enough to start a war. She paused, letting that sink in. Dutch doesn't want to share Harlem with you, Lucky. He wants to use Harlem profits to buy soldiers, weapons, and political protection. Then he wants to take over Manhattan, Brooklyn, and every other territory you control. Lucky's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Bank records don't lie, Stephanie said. Dutch has $400,000 in secret accounts under fake names. That's $400,000 that should have been shared with your organization according to your partnership agreement. She reached into her purse again and produced a second envelope. This envelope contains copies of Dutch's bank statements, loan applications, and property purchases. It also contains a letter Dutch wrote to Meyer Lansky's accountant, asking about the possibility of reorganizing territorial arrangements in Manhattan. Lucky looked at Meyer Lansky, who nodded grimly. The accountant had indeed received such a letter, and had reported it to Lucky weeks ago. Dutch Schultz is planning to betray you, Stephanie said. The only question is whether you're smart enough to see it. And that's when Albert Anastasia made the biggest mistake of his career. Chapter 7. The Gun. Anastasia, standing behind Stephanie's chair, had heard enough. In his experience, problems like this had simple solutions. You killed the person causing problems. You buried them in New Jersey. You moved on with business. Without waiting for Lucky's signal, Anastasia drew his revolver and pressed the barrel against Stephanie's temple. "Enough talking," he said. "Give us the envelopes or I'll blow your brains all over this table." Lucky didn't stop him. This was the traditional resolution to negotiations that went sideways. Intimidation escalated to threats, escalated to violence. It had worked thousands of times before, but Stephanie St. Clair wasn't like previous opponents. She didn't flinch, didn't beg, didn't offer compromises. Instead, she looked directly at Lucky Luciano and smiled. "Pull the trigger," she said. Anastasia hesitated. This wasn't the typical response. Usually, people begged for their lives, offered information, promised compliance. They didn't invite execution. "I said pull the trigger," Stephanie repeated. "Because the moment you do, everyone in this room dies." Lucky leaned forward. "What are you talking about?" "I told my associates that if I didn't return from this meeting by midnight, they should deliver copies of all my evidence to federal authorities. But I didn't tell you about the additional precautions." Stephanie's voice remained calm, conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than mutual destruction. "At 11:45 p.m., if I haven't called to confirm my safety, my people will assume I've been killed or kidnapped. They will immediately contact Thomas Dewey's office with evidence of your prostitution operation. They will also contact the FBI with details of your partnership with Dutch Schultz." Lucky checked his watch. 11:43 p.m. "But that's not the interesting part," Stephanie continued. "The interesting part is what happens to Dutch Schultz." She turned slightly to look at Albert Anastasia, the gun still pressed against her head. "If I die tonight, Dutch will receive copies of all my evidence about your organization by tomorrow morning. He'll know about your political corruption network. He'll know about your financial arrangements. He'll know about every weakness, every vulnerable point, every secret that keeps your empire functioning." Lucky's face went gray as he understood the implications. "Dutch will use that information to destroy you," Stephanie said. "He'll expose your prostitution ring to eliminate your blackmail power. He'll reveal your political bribes to corrupt your official protection. He'll destroy your credibility with the other families by proving you couldn't handle one woman with a French accent." She paused. "And then, while you're fighting for survival, while every law enforcement agency in New York is investigating your operations, while the other families are questioning your leadership, Dutch will take over everything, not just Harlem, not just Manhattan, everything." Albert Anastasia looked at Lucky, waiting for instructions. The gun remained pressed against Stephanie's temple, but his finger wasn't moving toward the trigger. Lucky was calculating. This was the kind of complex strategic problem that had made him the boss of bosses. Multiple variables, cascading consequences, no clear winning move. If they killed Stephanie, Dutch would receive intelligence that could destroy the Luciano family. If they let her live, she would continue operating independently, undermining their authority. But there was a third option. "What do you want?" Lucky asked. "I want what I've always wanted," Stephanie replied. "To operate my business without interference, to keep Harlem's money in Harlem, to protect my community from exploitation by outsiders. And in exchange? In exchange, I give you the evidence against Dutch Schultz. You handle your traitor problem however you see fit. And I continue running my numbers operation without any partnership, tribute, or interference from Italian families." Lucky considered the proposal. Stephanie was offering him information that could eliminate Dutch Schultz as a threat. But she was also demanding complete independence, something no non-Italian organization had ever achieved in New York. "How do I know you won't use your other information against me later?" Lucky asked. "Because I don't want to destroy your organization," Stephanie said. I want you to stay strong enough to keep other challengers away from Harlem. A weak Luciano family means every ambitious gangster in New York will try to take my territory. A strong Luciano family means they'll focus on easier targets. It was a brilliant strategic calculation. Stephanie wasn't just offering intelligence about Dutch Schultz. She was proposing a non-aggression pact that served both their interests. But Lucky still had one more card to play. Chapter 8. The words that changed everything. Lucky Luciano had built his reputation on never backing down, never showing weakness, never allowing challenges to his authority to go unpunished. Every gangster in New York knew that crossing Lucky Luciano meant death or worse. But Lucky was also a pragmatist. He understood that sometimes the most powerful move was strategic retreat. Sometimes the smartest decision was accepting a partial victory instead of risking total defeat. The problem was appearances. If word got out that Lucky Luciano had negotiated with Stephanie St. Clair instead of eliminating her, other rivals might interpret that as weakness. They might test his authority, challenge his decisions, question his leadership. Lucky needed a way to accept Stephanie's proposal while maintaining his reputation for strength. "Albert, put the gun away," Lucky said. Anastasia hesitated. "Boss?" "Put it away." Anastasia holstered his weapon and stepped back from Stephanie's chair. Lucky leaned back and lit a cigarette, buying time to think through the implications of his decision. The room remained silent while he smoked. Finally, he spoke. "Here's what's going to happen. You give me everything you have on Dutch Schultz. Right now. Tonight. In exchange, Italian families will not interfere with your Harlem operations." Stephanie nodded. "But," Lucky continued, "this is not a negotiation between equals. This is not a partnership. This is me making a business decision that happens to benefit both of us." He pointed his cigarette at her. "If you ever threaten an Italian family again, if you ever try to expand outside of Harlem, if you ever interfere with our operations in any other territory, the deal is off. And next time, there won't be any negotiation." Stephanie smiled. "Understood." She reached into her purse and produced a third envelope, thicker than the previous two. Bank records, correspondence, property deeds, and witness statements documenting Dutch Schultz's embezzlement and betrayal. Everything you need to handle the situation permanently. Lucky took the envelope and examined its contents briefly. Meyer Lansky looked over his shoulder, nodding as he recognized authentic financial documents. "This is good," Lucky said. "This is very good." He stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "Gentlemen," Lucky addressed his associates, "we have business to conduct with Mr. Schultz." As Lucky's men filed toward the exit, Stephanie remained seated. "Lucky," she said. He turned back. "You made the right choice tonight." Lucky studied her face for a long moment. "You know what, lady? I think you're right." He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of grudging respect. "But don't ever put me in this position again." "I won't have to," Stephanie replied. "From now on, we understand each other." Lucky Luciano walked out of Warehouse 47 at 11:52 p.m. on October 12, 1932. 8 minutes before Stephanie's deadline. 8 minutes before his empire could have been destroyed by federal investigations, rival gangsters, and political exposure. For the first time in his career, the boss of bosses had backed down from a confrontation, and Stephanie St. Clair had won the most important victory in the history of organized crime. Chapter 9. The Aftermath. Dutch Schultz was found shot to death in a Newark tavern on October 23, 1932, 11 days after Lucky Luciano received Stephanie's evidence. The official investigation concluded that Dutch had been killed during a robbery attempt. No arrests were made. Lucky never spoke publicly about his meeting with Stephanie St. Clair. But word spread through New York's underworld that the French woman from Harlem had somehow convinced the boss of bosses to leave her operation alone. The story grew in the telling, as underworld legends always do. Some versions claimed that Stephanie had blackmail material on every politician in New York. Others suggested she had supernatural powers, that she could see the future, that she had made a deal with dark forces. The truth was simpler and more impressive. Stephanie St. Clair had out-strategized the smartest gangster in America, using nothing but intelligence, preparation, and psychological warfare. For the next 8 years, until her retirement in 1940, Stephanie operated the largest independent numbers racket in American history. She collected over $200,000 monthly, employed more than 300 people, and maintained complete autonomy from Italian-American organized crime families. She used her profits to fund civil rights organizations, pay for legal challenges to discriminatory housing practices, and establish scholarship programs for Harlem students. When corrupt police officers tried to shake down black businesses, Stephanie's lawyers appeared in court with evidence of misconduct that ended careers and sent officers to prison. She never had another face-to-face meeting with Lucky Luciano, but they maintained an understanding that lasted until her death in 1969. Italian families stayed out of Harlem's numbers game. Stephanie stayed out of Italian territories. The mutual respect forged in that warehouse on the Lower East Side created the longest-lasting peace treaty in organized crime history. Lucky Luciano was deported to Italy in 1946 after serving 9 years in prison for running prostitution operations. The evidence that convicted him came from the same intelligence network Stephanie had used to blackmail him in 1932. During his deportation hearing, a reporter asked Lucky if he regretted any decisions from his criminal career. "I regret underestimating people," Lucky replied. "Smart people, dangerous people, people who could see 3 moves ahead while I was still thinking about the current game." When pressed for specifics, Lucky declined to elaborate, but people close to him claimed he kept a photograph on his desk in his Italian villa. The photograph showed a handwritten note in French dated October 12, 1932. The note read, "Respect is earned, not demanded. S. St. C." Lucky Luciano had learned that lesson the hard way, and he never forgot it. Epilogue. The legacy Stephanie St. Clair died on December 1, 1969 at age 82. Her funeral was attended by over 1,500 people. No Italian-American organized crime representatives were present, but expensive flower arrangements arrived with cards signed "A Friend" and "With Respect." Stephanie's will established a foundation funding education and civil rights initiatives in Harlem. The foundation's most unusual asset was never made public: a safety deposit box containing evidence of corruption spanning 4 decades of New York politics and organized crime. The box contained a note, "To be opened only if Harlem's independence is ever threatened." The box remains sealed today. Stephanie proved that intelligence could defeat violence, preparation could overcome intimidation, and courage could force the most powerful criminals in America to respect independence. She won because she was smarter than Lucky Luciano. And smart, as every gangster eventually learns, is the most dangerous thing you can be. Lucky Luciano put a gun to her head. Stephanie St. Clair put doubt in his mind, and doubt in the end was far more powerful than bullets.